Israel's high-tech border fortress, a blueprint for the world's walls. Stand at the southern edge of Israel, where the Negev Desert meets the Sinai Peninsula, and you'll witness something remarkable. Rising from the sand is a barrier that looks like it belongs in a science fiction film. It towers nearly 6 meters into the sky, roughly the height of a 2-story building. But what you see above ground is only part of the story. Beneath the surface, this structure extends deep into the earth, designed to thwart any attempt at tunneling. The entire length of the fence is equipped with an intricate network of motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and cutting-edge surveillance technology. Every inch is monitored. Every movement is tracked. This isn't just a fence, it's a statement of intent. No one crosses here without permission. Welcome to Israel's border with Egypt, a frontier that has been transformed into one of the most sophisticated security barriers on the planet. A nation encircled by uncertainty. To understand why Israel has invested so heavily in border infrastructure, you need to understand its geography and geopolitics. Israel is a small country, roughly the size of New Jersey, wedged into one of the most volatile regions on Earth. To its north lies Lebanon, home to Hezbollah. To the northeast, the war-torn remains of Syria. To the east, Jordan, a stable partner, but surrounded by instability. And to the south, Egypt and beyond it, the vast expanse of Africa and the Middle East. For decades, Israel has viewed itself as an island of stability in a sea of hostility. Whether that perception is accurate or not depends on who you ask, but it has undeniably shaped the country's approach to security. And nowhere is that approach more visible than in its borders. Over the past 2 decades, Israel has embarked on an ambitious project to surround its entire territory with high-tech barriers. Not just walls or fences, but integrated systems that combine physical obstacles with electronic surveillance, artificial intelligence, and rapid response capabilities. The goal? To create what military strategists call hermetic sealing, a border so secure that virtually nothing can cross it without detection. The Egyptian border, where it all began. The fence along the Egyptian border wasn't always there. For years, this was a porous frontier, particularly after the 2011 Egyptian Revolution, when security on the Sinai side weakened considerably. During that period, thousands of people, mostly refugees and migrants from Africa, crossed into Israel seeking asylum or economic opportunity. In 2010 alone, more than 12,000 people made the dangerous journey through the Sinai and into Israel. They came from Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, and other nations ravaged by conflict and poverty. Many were fleeing persecution. Others were simply searching for a better life. But the Israeli government saw this influx as a threat, not just to security, but to the country's demographic balance and Jewish character. In response, construction began on what would become one of the world's most formidable border barriers. The project took several years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. When it was completed in 2013, the results were immediate and dramatic. The number of illegal crossings plummeted from over 12,000 annually to just a handful, sometimes as few as 10 or 20 people per year. Shahar Nachmani, a soldier stationed at the border, explains how the system works. The fence is extremely high, he says. You can't climb it alone. You'd need at least 2 people, one to boost the other up. And even if you manage to touch it, sensors trigger an alarm immediately. Within minutes, patrols are on their way. The technology embedded in this barrier is constantly evolving. Radar systems scan the horizon for approaching vehicles. Infrared cameras detect body heat in total darkness. Fiber optic sensors buried underground can pick up the vibrations of someone digging. And overhead, drones and observation towers provide additional layers of surveillance. It's a system designed not just to stop people, but to deter them from even trying. Beyond Egypt, a country surrounded by walls. While the Egyptian border fence might be the most complete, it's far from the only barrier Israel has constructed. The country is systematically building similar structures along all of its external borders. To the north, along the Lebanese frontier, Israel has erected barriers designed to prevent infiltration by Hezbollah fighters. These aren't just simple fences. They're complex defensive systems integrated with underground sensors to detect tunnel construction, a tactic Hezbollah has used in the past. Along the Syrian border in the Golan Heights, Israel has reinforced and expanded its barrier systems, particularly in response to the chaos of the Syrian civil war. The concern here isn't just about refugees, but about armed militants from various factions potentially crossing into Israeli territory. Even along the Jordanian border, where relations between the two countries are relatively stable and governed by a peace treaty, Israel has upgraded its security infrastructure significantly. The most controversial barrier, however, remains the West Bank separation wall, a structure that has drawn international criticism and legal challenges for decades. The West Bank wall, symbol of division. Unlike the Egyptian border fence, which runs along an internationally recognized boundary, the West Bank barrier cuts through disputed territory. Israel began constructing it in 2002, during the height of the Second Intifada, when suicide bombings were killing dozens of Israeli civilians in buses, cafes, and marketplaces. The official Israeli position is clear. This barrier is a temporary security measure designed to prevent terrorist attacks. And by most accounts, it has been effective in that regard. Statistics show that the number of successful suicide bombings dropped dramatically after the barrier's construction. But the barrier has also become a powerful symbol of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Much of it doesn't follow the pre-1967 Green Line, which many in the international community consider the legitimate border between Israel and a future Palestinian state. Instead, it often cuts deep into the West Bank, sometimes separating Palestinian farmers from their fields, families from their relatives, and entire communities from essential services. The barrier itself varies in appearance. In some places, it's a concrete wall that stands 8 meters high, taller than the Berlin Wall ever was. In other sections, it's a multi-layered fence system with patrol roads, ditches, and razor wire. Altogether, when completed, it will stretch approximately 700 kilometers. Rafu Ra, a Palestinian human rights activist who has spent years documenting the barrier's impact, fought particularly hard against a section being built near Bethlehem. He describes what he's witnessed over the years. Israel insists this wall works, he says. They point to statistics showing fewer attacks. And yes, that may be true in some ways. But I've personally seen people climbing over this barrier on multiple occasions. I've seen them using ladders, ropes, whatever they can find. You cannot lock people in a confined area, cut them off from their livelihoods, and expect them not to find ways out. People need to work. They need to feed their families. His words touch on a fundamental challenge with any border barrier. While walls might stop organized attacks, they're far less effective against economic desperation. The limits of walls. Israel Ziv, a security consultant who helped construct parts of the West Bank barrier during his military service, acknowledges this reality candidly. Despite his role in building these defenses, he understands their limitations. When we talk about Palestinian workers who are motivated to find employment in Israel, the reality is that they will dare to cross, he explains. They will invent new methods. They will find the weak points. Physical defenses are useful, absolutely, but they're not effective in every case. When there's a strong economic need, when someone is trying to find a job to support their family, they will find those holes in the defense. Many succeed in crossing. And indeed, every week, thousands of Palestinian workers do exactly that. Some cross through official checkpoints with permits, but many others slip through gaps in the barrier, navigate around its endpoints, or simply scale it when patrols aren't looking. Occasionally, these gaps are exploited by those with violent intentions. Despite the barrier, attacks still occur, though far less frequently than before its construction. This has led Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to call for closing the remaining gaps, a project that continues today. But the porousness of the West Bank barrier raises important questions. If Israel, with all its technological prowess and military capability, cannot completely seal off the West Bank despite years of effort and billions of dollars in investment, what does that say about the fundamental effectiveness of walls? Israel's border tech goes global. Despite these limitations, or perhaps because the challenges are so complex, Israel has become a world leader in border security technology. What began as a national security imperative has evolved into a lucrative export industry. Israeli companies now sell border security solutions to countries around the world. The expertise developed through decades of managing hostile borders has been packaged into products and services that governments from North America to Europe to Asia are eager to purchase. Elbit Systems, Israel's largest publicly traded defense contractor, is at the forefront of this industry. The company has built what it describes as an electronic wall along sections of the Arizona-Mexico border for the United States Department of Homeland Security. This isn't a physical barrier in the traditional sense. Instead, it's a network of surveillance towers equipped with radar, cameras, and sensors that can detect movement across vast stretches of desert. The system feeds information to a command center where operators can dispatch Border Patrol agents to intercept anyone attempting to cross illegally. The appeal of such systems is obvious. They're potentially more cost-effective than building and maintaining hundreds of miles of physical wall. They can cover difficult terrain where construction would be impractical, and they can be adapted and upgraded as technology advances. During his 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump made building a wall along the entire U.S.-Mexico border a centerpiece of his political platform. At rallies across America, crowds would chant, "Build the wall," as Trump promised that Mexico would pay for its construction. When defending his proposal, Trump frequently cited Israel as proof that walls work. He claimed, "They have a wall in Israel that's 99.9% effective," numbers that, honestly, don't appear in any official statistics but nonetheless resonated with his supporters. The comparison isn't entirely fair. The challenges facing the U.S.-Mexico border are fundamentally different from those Israel faces. The border is far longer, nearly 3,000 kilometers compared to Israel's much shorter frontiers. The terrain varies wildly, from California beaches to Arizona deserts to the Rio Grande River. And the primary issue isn't terrorism or war, but economic migration and drug trafficking, problems that walls historically have limited effectiveness against. What Trump might not have known, or maybe chose not to mention, is that even Israel's most sophisticated barriers remain imperfect. The West Bank wall, despite being shorter and backed by substantial military presence, gets crossed illegally by thousands every month. Behind every statistic about border crossings prevented or attacks stopped, there are human stories. The African migrants who used to cross from Egypt into Israel weren't criminals or terrorists. Most were refugees fleeing horrific violence in their home countries. Eritreans, for instance, were escaping one of the world's most repressive regimes, where indefinite military conscription is the norm, and dissent is crushed brutally. Sudanese refugees were fleeing genocide in Darfur. These were people exercising what many consider a fundamental human right, seeking asylum from persecution. When the Egyptian border fence was completed, that escape route was effectively closed. Those same people are now trapped in the Sinai Peninsula, in Libya, or in their home countries. Some have died attempting other routes. Others languish in detention centers. And thousands who made it to Israel before the fence was completed remain there today, in a legal limbo. Not citizens, not granted permanent asylum, but unable or unwilling to return home. For Palestinians in the West Bank, the separation barrier has fundamentally altered daily life. What was once a 10-minute drive to visit family or reach a hospital can now require hours navigating checkpoints and detours. Farmers have been cut off from olive groves their families have tended for generations. Children walk miles out of their way to reach school. These are the hidden costs of border security. costs that don't appear in defense contracts or political speeches, but that shape the lives of millions. Representatives from Elbit Systems, even as they market their border security products globally, acknowledge something important. Technology alone isn't a complete solution. We believe that electronic solutions have far more advantages than any physical barrier, an Elbit spokesperson explains. They can detect intrusions early, over long ranges, gathering information from multiple sensors simultaneously. But physical walls have inherent limitations. They can be climbed, tunneled under, or breached. Electronic systems offer more reliable detection, but detection isn't prevention. Knowing that someone is attempting to cross isn't the same as stopping them. It still requires a response, border agents who can reach the location quickly, legal frameworks for processing people who are apprehended, and policies for what happens next. This is where the technology-centric approach to border security often falls short. It treats borders as engineering problems, rather than as complex intersections of geopolitics, human rights, economics, and international law. Israel Ziv, the security consultant, puts it plainly. A physical wall is just one part of a broader strategy. You also need intelligence, rapid response capabilities, cooperation with your neighbors, and policies that address the root causes driving people to cross in the first place. That last point is crucial. As long as economic disparities exist, as long as people in one place face unemployment and poverty while opportunities exist just across a border, some will attempt to cross, regardless of barriers. As long as war, persecution, and violence push people from their homes, some will seek safety elsewhere, regardless of the risks. Walls don't address these underlying conditions. At best, they manage symptoms. Israel often describes itself as a startup nation, a small country punching above its weight in technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Nowhere is this more evident than in the security sector. The country's unique combination of factors, advanced technological capabilities, sustained security threats, mandatory military service that creates a pipeline of experienced personnel, and substantial government funding, has made it an innovation hub for defense and security technologies. What gets developed and tested in Israel often finds its way to markets worldwide. Drones, facial recognition systems, cybersecurity tools, and border surveillance technologies pioneered by Israeli companies are now used by governments across the globe. In some ways, Israel serves as a laboratory, a place where security technologies are tested under real-world conditions and then refined for export. The barriers along its borders are showcases for potential customers. But Israel is also a microcosm of broader global trends. Around the world, borders are being fortified. Walls, fences, and barriers are proliferating at an unprecedented rate. Hungary built a fence along its border with Serbia to stop refugees during the 2015 migration crisis. Austria followed with barriers of its own. India is constructing extensive fencing along its border with Bangladesh. Saudi Arabia has built barriers along its borders with Iraq and Yemen. Even Norway has erected a fence along parts of its border with Russia. According to researchers who track these trends, there are now more than 70 border walls or fences globally, a number that has more than tripled since the end of the Cold War, when the fall of the Berlin Wall was supposed to herald a new era of openness and connection. Here's the paradox. We live in an age of unprecedented global connection. Information, money, and goods flow across borders more freely than ever before. A teenager in Mumbai can video chat with friends in Mexico City. A business executive in Berlin can transfer millions to Singapore with a few clicks. Container ships carry products manufactured in China to stores in Chicago within weeks. Yet simultaneously, the movement of people, particularly poor people, refugees, and migrants, is being restricted more aggressively than at any point in recent history. This isn't just about security. It's about who gets to move freely and who doesn't. A wealthy businessman can travel visa-free to most countries. A refugee fleeing war faces razor wire and detention centers. Technology workers are recruited globally and given fast-tracked visas. Agricultural laborers are left to risk their lives crossing deserts. Israel's border barriers are both a cause and effect of this trend. They're a response to genuine security concerns. Suicide bombings were a real threat that traumatized Israeli society. But they're also part of a broader global movement toward what some scholars call border militarization, the transformation of borders from lines on maps into heavily fortified zones of exclusion. So, do these walls and fences actually work? Well, the answer really depends on what you mean by work. If the goal is to reduce the number of people crossing illegally, then yes, they can be highly effective, at least in the short term. For example, the Egyptian border fence reduced crossings by more than 99%. That's a dramatic result that's honestly hard to dismiss. If the goal is to stop terrorism, the evidence is more mixed, but still suggestive. Suicide bombings in Israel did decline sharply after the West Bank barrier was constructed. Whether that's entirely due to the barrier or also the result of improved intelligence, Israeli military operations, and changes in Palestinian tactics is debatable, but the barrier likely played a role. However, if the goal is to solve the underlying conflicts and tensions that drive people to cross borders in the first place, then walls have clearly failed. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is no closer to resolution. Economic disparities persist. Regional instability continues. So walls might manage these problems, but they don't resolve them. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, has described the threats facing Israel in stark terms. He's referred to beasts in the neighborhood, a reference to ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other militant groups operating in the Middle East. His solution has been pretty consistent: build barriers, strengthen borders, and use technology to maintain separation and security. Under his leadership, Israel has pursued border security with remarkable single-mindedness. But Netanyahu's vision actually extends beyond Israel. He sees the challenges facing his country as a preview of what other nations will face. Terrorism, migration, instability, these aren't unique to the Middle East. They're global phenomena. If Netanyahu is right, then what we're seeing in Israel might indeed be a glimpse of the future for many countries. More walls, more surveillance, more sophisticated technology deployed to control who moves where. Already, we're seeing this trend accelerate. The COVID-19 pandemic, which led to unprecedented border closures worldwide, has in some ways normalized the idea that borders can and should be sealed when governments deem it necessary. Climate change is expected to create hundreds of millions of climate refugees in the coming decades, which will likely prompt even more aggressive border fortification. Technology is advancing rapidly. Artificial intelligence, facial recognition, biometric databases, and predictive analytics are all being integrated into border security systems. In the future, borders might not just be physical barriers, but invisible electronic curtains that identify and track everyone who approaches. So, is this the world we want? A planet carved up into fortified zones, where movement is a privilege rather than a right, where walls define our relationship with those on the other side. Standing at the Israeli-Egyptian border, watching the sun set over the Sinai Desert, the fence casts long shadows across the sand. It's an impressive piece of engineering, no question about that. The sensors hum quietly, cameras swivel on their mounts. Somewhere in a command center, operators watch screens showing every angle, every approach. But honestly, it's also profoundly sad. This barrier represents safety and security to many Israelis who remember when buses exploded in city centers. It represents a necessary shield in a dangerous neighborhood. But it also represents separation, fear, and the limits of our collective imagination to solve problems without resorting to walls. The fence itself is neutral, just steel, concrete, and silicon. But what it symbolizes is deeply contested. Is it a prudent defensive measure or an aggressive act of exclusion? Is it a model for other countries or a cautionary tale? Is it a temporary solution or a permanent scar on the landscape? The answers depend on who you ask, where they stand, and what they've experienced. Israeli companies will continue exporting their border security expertise. Countries will continue building barriers. The market for these technologies is booming, and there's really no sign it will slow down. But we should be thoughtful about what we're buying into, both literally and figuratively. Walls can provide security, but they can also create new problems. They can stop threats, but they can also stop opportunities. They can protect some people while harming others. They're tools, and like any tool, their value depends on how and why they're used. The Israeli experience offers lessons, but they're complicated ones. Yes, sophisticated barriers can significantly reduce illegal crossings. Yes, they can make terrorism more difficult. But no, they cannot eliminate determined individuals. No, they cannot resolve conflicts. And no, they cannot address the root causes that drive people to risk everything to cross them. Perhaps most importantly, walls change us. They change how we see our neighbors, literally. When you erect a barrier between yourself and another community, you stop seeing them as clearly. They become abstract, dangerous, other. This psychological effect might be more significant than any physical security the wall provides.